After wishing you good morning, good afternoon, I thought it would be appropriate if we spoke about the overlap between Rosh Hashana and Shabbos, which is relevant to us just in a few hours almost. And the halacha is that we don't blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah that falls on Shabbos, and that is what we call an akira of a davar min Torah, meaning here's the mitzvah min Torah of blowing shofar, and we don't have that many mitzvahs d'oraisa on the moadim bisman hazeh. A lot of the mitzvahs are no longer relevant because we don't have a Beis Hamikdash. And for example, if we take the karbanos of musafim, which are very essential to the moadim, yet that's all suspended. We do have on Sukkot the mitzvahs of Sukkah and Lulav. We have on Pesach the mitzvah of Matzah. And of course, on Rosh Hashanah, the mitzvah of Shofar. All of the above are d'oraisa, and they're very precious to us. And yet, when there's an overlap between Shabbos and one of the Moadim, we suspend those mitzvahs, not matzah. And I think in the past we've discussed why we will eat matzah on Pesach Shechalios b'Shabbos, and that's the exception to the rule. But certainly there's no lulav, and there's no shofar, and as far as Megillah is concerned, there won't be a mitzvah Megillah. All of these mitzvahs are suspended because of this clash, if you will, between the Moed and Shabbos. And in the case of shofar, we have a particular clash because the Yerushalmi in the fourth parak of Rosh Hashanah insists that this halacha of suspending the shofar blowing on Shabbos of Rosh Hashanah is a doraisa halacha. Certainly, with regard to lulav and Megillah, which is the Rabbanan, but even in the case of lulav, the Torah commands us unequivocally to take the lulav on the first day of Sukkot, even if it's Shabbos. But not so, argues the Yerushalmi, in the case of shofar. The Torah actually suspends the mitzvah of shofar when there's an overlap between Shabbos and Rosh Hashanah. And the Yerushalmi derives this from what seems to be a collision, or shall we call it a contradiction, between two psukim. And the mitzvah of blowing shofar on Rosh Hashanah appears twice in the Torah. Once in Parshas Pinchas, and another time in Parshas Emor. And the stira is obvious, because whereas in Parshas Emor, the Torah commands us zichron trua, which literally means to remember the trua, in Parshas Pinchas, in Sefer Bamidbar, the Torah commands us yom trua, indicating that we're not going to remember the shofar, but rather we're going to blow the shofar. So what is it? Is it a yom trua and we blow the shofar? Is it a zichron trua and we just simply remember the shofar? And in order to reconcile this apparent contradiction, the Yerushalmi suggests the following answer. And that is that kan be yontiv shechalias b'chol, v'kan be yontiv shechalias b'Shabbos, which means the following, that in a normal year, if Rosh Hashanah falls, okay, lo adu, but that's because of the calendar, but on any weekday, then we have the mitzvah of Yom Trua and we blow the shofar. The Torah in the parsha of Zichron Trua, which again is in Parshas Emor, there the Torah is addressing a case where Rosh Hashanah is on Shabbos, and there it's only Zichron Trua. We will not blow the shofar. This is a doraisa halacha derived from the pasuk. And we'll soon see that the Bavli disagrees with the Yerushalmi on two counts, meaning for two reasons, but disagrees with the fundamental conclusion of the Yerushalmi that the suspension of shofar on Rosh Hashanah Chaliyas b'Shabbos is doraisa. It's not doraisa at all, according to the Bavli. And why did the Bavli object to the Yerushalmi? And this is Gemara Rosh Hashanah Chav Tesam and Beis on two counts. First of all, the Bavli understood that the Iser Tkiyah Shofar on Shabbos is not doraisa. Why would the Torah suspend the mitzvah of blowing the shofar on Shabbos? Why would the Torah do such a thing? The Torah never prohibited blowing the shofar on Shabbos. So from a doraisa perspective, there's no problem in blowing the shofar on Shabbos. It's perfectly permissible. And in the language of the Gemara in Shabbos, the Gemara says that Tkiyah shofar chachma hi v'yeina malacha. And that means that the blowing of the shofar does not fit into any of the categories of malacha on Shabbos. Now, it's possible that the concept of chachma is a doraisa concept, but very unlikely. And certainly, according to the Bavli, the concept of chachma is only an isur d'rabbanan. So blowing the shofar is not a malacha, it's not prohibited, and therefore there is no reason to say that the Torah, when it says zichron trua, is referring to Shabbos and suspending the mitzvah of shofar. Now, we do want to add one important point here. Although we don't blow shofar on Shabbos Shachalios b'Shabbos as a general rule, but even according to the Yerushalmi, back in the day when the Beis HaMikdash stood, they would in fact blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah Shachalios b'Shabbos in the Beis HaMikdash itself. So that there's a separate halacha with regard to the Beis HaMikdash, according to Yerushalmi, that we blow the shofar in the Mikdash on Rosh Hashanah, even though it's Shabbos. Now, what we should mention is there's a pasuk that says Shabboson Zichron Trua. And that pasuk adds the element of Shabboson. In other words, Shabboson is a reference to Shabbos, and Zichron Trua is a reference to the suspension of the blowing of the shofar. It's only Zichron Trua. Then you could ask the question, well, according to the Yerushalmi, if Shabboson is only Zichron Trua, why do we blow the shofar on Shabbos Shachalios, on Rosh Hashanah Shachalios, even according to the Yerushalmi, in the Beis HaMikdash? And the answer is because the pasuk says in Parshas Pinchas, B'echad lachodesh, Zichron Trua, V'kravtem Ishei Lashem. So that in the pasuk we have Zichron Trua and we have the mitzvah of Hakravas HaKarban. And this is a remez to us that just like Shabbos is overridden by karbanos, and that's called Olas Shabbos b'Shabbato. So we bring the karbanos of Shabbos, violating many different malachas, on Shabbos. So too, we will blow the shofar in the Beis HaMikdash, and it becomes a Yom Trua even on Shabbos in the Beis HaMikdash. So again, to the same extent that we override the Shabbos for the sake of karbanos, the Torah gave us a remez that we will override the Iser of Tkiyah Shofar on Shabbos in the same place, in the same location where we override the Shabbos for the sake of the karbanos, namely in the Beis HaMikdash. And this is an unbelievable concept because it means that really blowing the shofar on Shabbos means overriding the Shabbos. How could that be? And I believe the answer to this question is that the Torah considers blowing the shofar for the sake of the mitzvah of shofar to be a malacha. Or if not a malacha, at least an Isur Shabbos. So it's paradoxical. The mitzvah itself gives a certain significance, upgrading the Maisa Tkiyah Shofar to that of a quasi-malacha, namely of an Isur Shabbos. And by the way, I'm not the one who discovered that there's an Isur Shabbos that's not a malacha. We have many examples of that. For example, Tchumen, according to the mind of the Omer, that Tchumen is Doraisa, is an Isur Doraisa on Shabbos without being a malacha. According to one day in the Gemara, Havara, burning a fire on Shabbos, is only an Isur and not a malacha. We're going to add to that list now Tkiyah Shofar, but not just any Tkiyah Shofar. If, for example, on a regular day of Shabbos, a regular Shabbos, I would blow the shofar, I would certainly not, even according to Yerushalmi, be in violation of the Shabbos. It's not a malacha and there's no Isur. But the Torah says Zichron Trua, telling me and commanding me that with regard to the shofar, we're not going to override the Shabbos for the sake of the mitzvah of shofar, but rather it's going to be Zichron Trua. However, V'kravtem ishe Lashem, just like we override the Shabbos in the Beis Hamikdash for the sake of the Karbanos, we will override the Shabbos in the Beis Hamikdash for the sake of Tkiyah Shofar. So the halacha that in Mikdash we blow on Rosh Hashanah Chalils b'Shabbos, that's a doraisa halacha that's derived from the Torah itself. But if it's outside the Beis Hamikdash, and of course the mitzvah of shofar applies anywhere on the face of the earth, that Tkiyah Shofar on Rosh Hashanah Shechalils b'Shabbos is, according to Yerushalmi, a doraisa halacha. And perhaps we could go one step further and say that the Torah created a brand new mitzvah that applies only every so often when there's an overlap between Shabbos and Rosh Hashanah. What is that new mitzvah? That mitzvah is Zichron Trua. So that in Beis HaMikdash, we go back to the mitzvah of Yom Trua, even though it's Shabbos. But outside the Beis HaMikdash, the mitzvah is Zichron Trua. So Zichron Trua, according to Yerushalmi, is not just, shall we say, an oser, meaning telling you that you're not allowed to blow the shofar, as we said, because it's an Isur outside the Mikdash on Shabbos, but it's a kiyum. It's a kiyum of Zichron Trua. And what we're going to try to understand in the next few minutes is how could there be a kiyum of Zichron Trua? What does that mean, a kiyum hamitzvah of Zichron Trua? Obviously, Zichron Trua is a passive state of non-fulfillment of the shofar. Why is that a kiyum? How does that in any way enhance the mitzvah of Zichron Trua of Rosh Hashanah? The mitzvah of Rosh Hashanah, in this case of Shabbos, is just the opposite. Instead of Yom Trua, the mitzvah is Zichron Trua. Whereas in Beis HaMikdash, we go back to the mitzvah of Yom Trua, even though it's Shabbos. But as we indicated before, the Bavli objects to Yerushalmi because this concept that there's a separate Isur of blowing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah on Shabbos is something that's unacceptable. The Bavli never had this on its radar screen. But the Bavli has a different objection to the Yerushalmi. And that is that why does the Gemara go out of its way to tell me that Tkiyah Shofar is not a malacha? It's only a chachma. That, according to the Yerushalmi, is not relevant. Because even if I grant you that Tkiyah Shofar is not a malacha, but only a chachma, nevertheless, according to Yerushalmi, it's prohibited on Shabbos of Rosh Hashanah. The Gemara indicates that the reason why shofar should be allowed and even obligatory on Rosh Hashanah Shechaliyos b'Shabbos is because shofar is only a chachma, downgrading the violation of Shabbos in the case of shofar. According to the Yerushalmi, that's not so. According to the Yerushalmi, Zichron Trua Doraisa means we don't blow the shofar on Shabbos. So don't tell me, well, it's only a chachma and it's not a malacha. That seems to be totally irrelevant and almost antithetical to the position of the Yerushalmi that we are prohibited, we are enjoined from blowing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah Shechaliyos b'Shabbos. In any event, obviously we all know this, and I'm not being mechadish any chidushim. The Yerushalmi and the Bavli are at loggerheads. The Yerushalmi doesn't know anything about Gzeira de Rabbah. The Bavli bases everything on Gzeira de Rabbah. And let's take a minute to think about Gzeira de Rabbah. In the case of Shofar, there are many, many different intricacies and laws and nuances of how to fulfill the mitzvah of Shofar. And for many years, I served as the Makri in the Emek Learning Center. It was a very nervous and, it generated a lot of tension because the laws of Tkiyah Shofar are very complicated, especially the Hafsakos, meaning at what point do you have to repeat the shofar blowing because there was a hefsek and a wrong Tkiyah. Very complicated halachos. We also have complications with regard to Neshima Achas, with regard to the Seder Atkiyos. When do we blow the Tashrat? When do we blow the Tarat? When do we blow this? And the Tkiyos to Yushav, Tkiyos to Uma. There are a host of halachas here. And therefore, one might be tempted to seek out a baki, as Rabbah argues. Again, according to some Girsa, it's Rava, not Rabbah, but we are familiar with the Girsa of Rabbah. And when you seek out a baki, you take the shofar with you, and you blow in front of the baki. He wants to hear how you're going to blow the shofar. So you're going to carry the shofar to bring it over to the baki, who's going to explain and paskin for you how to blow the shofar. It's a very logical kind of thing. Again, you'd rather do that before Rosh Hashanah, in preparation for Rosh Hashanah, but there are many issues that could come up, toch kidei the tkiyah. And again, I don't have time now to discuss with you. We could have a whole shir about what's called Maisa de Megensa, and all the issues in the Maisa Megensa, quoted by the Rosh and Simon Yudalf, they all took place on Rosh Hashanah. And that's where they came to the Ravan to ask him exactly how to fulfill the mitzvah, etc., etc. But let's ask the following question. Are we talking about Meleches Hotzah? Meleches Hotzah means that there was an Akira and a Hanocha. The Akira was done in one Rishus and the Hanocha in another Rishus. And one Rishus is the Rishus HaYochid, the other is Rishus HaRabim. And presumably, when a person takes the shofar to ask a question to a baki, he picks it up in his own house or in the synagogue, both of which are Rishus HaYochid. And they have what's called Hekef Mechitzos. So the Akira was done in Rishus HaYochid. Where is the Hanocha going to take place? Well, presumably the baki is also in a Rishus HaYochid. So you're going over to the house of the baki with your shofar, and you made an Akira in your Rishus HaYochid and a Hanocha in his Rishus HaYochid. Well, I got news for you. That's not a Malach of Hotzah. Malach of Hotzah, as we said before, requires an Akira in one kind of Rishus and a Hanocha in another. So the Gemara, therefore, is very careful to tell us that the Gzeira of Rabbah is not based on Hotzah Mirshus Shus, but rather on Havaras Daled Amos Bershus HaRabim. In other words, in your journey from your Rishus HaYochid, you're the shofar blower, to the Baki's Rishus HaYochid, you pass through a Rishus HaRabim. You begin with an Akira in one Rishus HaYochid, you end with Hanocha in another Rishus HaYochid, but in the middle, you carry the shofar 4 amos in Rishus HaRabim. And guess what? In such a case, you're chayav for Meleches HaAvara, Mavir, not Hotzah, despite the fact that the Akira was in a Rishus HaYochid and the Hanocha was in a Rishus HaYochid. Because in the case of Mavir, you're chayav no matter where the akiras were, as long as he carried it 4 amos in Rishus HaRabim. And this is called a shvus. Now ask yourself the question, why then, according to the Bavli, do we allow a blowing of the shofar on Shabbos of Rosh Hashanah in the Beis HaMikdash? What happened to the Gzeira D'Rabba? Where did it disappear to? And here we're going to activate the principle of Ein Shvus B'Mikdash. That in Mikdash, we're not afraid of Shvusim, and the Iser of blowing shofar on Shabbos is based on a Shvus, Atu Havara, and there are no Shvusim in Mikdash. So that the contrast between the Yerushalmi and the Bavli is a twofold contrast. Number one, the Yerushalmi, in a mind-boggling chiddush, very revolutionary, would prohibit blowing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah Shechalios B'Shabbos on a Doraisa level, completely oblivious to the Gzeira D'Rabba as a Shvus D'Rabbanon. And number two, as far as blowing the shofar in Mikdash on Rosh Hashanah Shechalios B'Shabbos, Yerushalmi would posit likewise that that's a Doraisa. And the Torah tells us that on the day of Zichron Trua, Bekravtem es Karbanos Hashem, you will in the Mikdash fulfill the mitzvah of shofar as it were written as Yom Trua. Whereas the Bavli, where the whole institution of non-blowing the shofar is the Rabbanon, because of the Gzeira D'Rabba Shevi Avirenu Daled Amos to the Baki, then we're going to apply the principle of Ein Shvus B'Mikdash. Now again, we're not going to get into the Shitas HaRif, the famous Shitas HaRif. The Rif would blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah Shechalios B'Shabbos in the Bezdin, because he held that the Bezdin has the same status as the Mikdash, and just like there's Ein Shvus B'Mikdash, there's no Shvus in the Bezdin. And there were those who wanted to institute blowing the shofar on Shabbos in Yerushalayim, because Yerushalayim, according to the Rambam, has a kind of a quasi status of Beis HaMikdash. Be that as it may, the question now arises, and this is a question of the Mishnah Berurah: how could it be that the Rabbanon, because of a chashash, some way out suspicion, that somebody might carry the shofar 4 amos in Rishus HaRabim, therefore we're going to be oker of mitzvah doraisa? But the Mishnah Berurah adds very strong teeth to his question, because the Shulchan Aruch paskins that we don't have Rishus HaRabim doraisa bisman hazeh. All of our so-called Rishus HaRabims are Carmelites, which means that the whole Iser, even if we to be Choshesh, that'll carry the shofar to a Baki and carry it 4 amos on Shabbos, Rishus HaRabim, even that's a D'Rabbanan, because our Rishus HaRabim is only a Carmelis. And if you'll ask me why is our Rishus HaRabim a Carmelis, I will tell you that we're relying on the sheet of Tosfos, that a Rishus HaRabim Doraisa requires Shish and Ribu. And we don't have such an area today. Or maybe we do. So if you have the pages that David Spiegel, I want to thank him from the bottom of my heart, because I don't know if he got it last night. It was very late on his clock when I sent it to him, but he always comes through in the clutch. So David gave us pages 226 and on. You'll take a look on page 227, and you'll see in the main paragraph here where he quotes the Shulchan Aruch and the Beis Yosef, same author, that Bisman hazeh we don't have Rishus HaRabim D'Oraisa. All of our Rishus HaRabim has the status of a Carmelis, which is only D'Rabbanan. And therefore, the question is, as the Mishnah Berurah formulates it, how can it be that we're not going to fulfill a mitzvah D'Oraisa when we're obligated according to Torah law because of a chashash of violating an Isur D'Rabbanan of Carmelis? And truth be told, that as the Mishnah Berurah points out, this question was raised a century before the Mishnah Berurah, in the Marsham. And by the way, the Marsham is from Berzhan, but has nothing to do with my last name. It's in Galicia. In any event, and he writes the following: the Berzhana Rav says he saw in a tshuva the Besamim Rosh. Very controversial exactly who the Besamim Rosh is. Some say it's the Rosh himself, but it's not. Anyway, he writes the following question: in many, many different halachas, we're going to be mekil as far as Moleches Hotzah, because we're going to assume we don't have a Rosh Hashanah Doraisa. And I think what he has in mind are various kulas with regard to a chole, or perhaps a kula on Bein Hashmashos, many situations in which, for muktzah purposes and others, we're going to say that Rosh Hashanah now is a Carmelist, it's not Doraisa. And yet we get to Tkiyas Shofar and Lulav, two mitzvahs Doraisa, and all of a sudden we're going to raise, you know what I'm saying, to raise all the dust here. How can we allow these mitzvahs Doraisa to take place on Shabbos? Maybe he'll carry it for Amos and violate what? Violate Carmelists? V'chiyala al hadas. Listen to the Marsham's language. Levatel mitzvah min Torah shema ish echad. You know, some Joe out there, I don't know where he is. You know, he's at the end of.
Not Joe. Joe wouldn't do it.
Not this Joe. Yitev yaver arba amis, and therefore going to be oker a mitzvah doraisa of shofar. Now, Rabbosai, if you happen to have been here last Wednesday, when we got together, I pointed out to you that the maskana of the Gemara is that there's only two occasions in which we go into the Kodesh Kodashim during the entire year to fulfill a mitzvah. One is the Kohen Gadol for the Avodas Pnim on Yom Kippur, and the other is Shofar. We enter into the Kodesh Kodashim on Rosh Hashanah, not the first day of Rosh Hashanah this year, but in general, the second day, for the sake of Shofar. So we're taking a mitzvah which allows us and projects us into the Kodesh Kodashim, and we're going to suspend that mitzvah, just cross it off your list. Why? Because we won't call him Joe if you're getting said some Bob out there, I don't know where he is. He's on the face of the moon, and he might carry 4 amas to Rosh Hashanah. Forget it. No mitzvah l'dorei doros of shofar doraisa lifnai v'lifnim. And by the way, somebody asked me, it's a famous question, if you have an option of davening in 2 places on Rosh Hashanah, again, it's only relevant to Sunday this year. But you could daven in a place where the ambiance is very, very conducive to having kavanah b'tefillah. However, the shofar blowing is, very shaky over there. I don't know. The other option is you can go to a place, a shul, where the shofar blowing is excellent, perfect. But it's not conducive to tefillah. So which comes first? Should I put on my priority list tefillah or shofar? And guess what? The poskim say that you should put shofar on your priority list, even if it means, again, you ask yourself a psychological question, what's the essence of Rosh Hashanah if not tefillah? With all due respect to the shofar. Shofar is not shofar, tarat, but what about tefillah? Then go for shofar. That's where you should be. By the way, on the side, not necessarily for publication, but my Rebbe Rav Soloveitchik was asked his only opportunity to hear the shofar is in a conservative temple. And the Rav told him not to go. My bad. Comes along the Marsham, and he says the following: Elanosna Torah koach lechachamim, The Torah gave authority to the Chachamim to suspend the mitzvah d'oraisa. V'heim ro lechazek b'yosers haShabbos. If you ask me, it's almost as if the Marsham is telling us that there's a symbolic gesture over here. I don't know how much we're concerned with that fellow there who carries, maybe, it's Carmelist anyway. But there's a statement here, almost a teaching that's being transmitted maybe on almost a subconscious level, that we will do everything to protect the Shabbos. Lechazek es haShabbos. V'chol she'efshar she'yavo kilkul b'zman hazeh. Even if there's some way out possibility of a kilkul, of a violation that's only the Rabbanan of Shabbos, akru afilu mitzvahs haShofar. If this is not a Musa Shmuz about Shabbos, I don't know what is. Ukshanachnu nachzo lahatir anetila, meaning lulav, vatkiya on shofar, asi lizulzule. Meaning originally, Rosh Hashanah at the time of Rava was d'oraisa, which again, I don't know exactly how to work that out, but let's just leave it as an unexplained premise. There was an entity called Rosh Hashanah d'oraisa once upon a time. Maybe it was a Sratya, maybe it was a Platya, whatever it was. And at that time, they instituted a Gzeira, a Shvus, because he might carry the Shofar Daled Amos. And therefore, he would violate a Doraisa because they had a Rosh Hashanah Doraisa. Once they instituted this Gzeira, it becomes a matter of protecting the Shabbos. And here, I'm tempted to want to close the gap to some extent between the Yerushalmi and the Bavli. We said that according to Yerushalmi, by not taking the shofar and blowing it on Shabbos, we have a kiyum on mitzvah of zichron trua. According to the Bavli, by not blowing the shofar on Shabbos, we have a kiyum. But that kiyum, according to the Bavli, is not the kiyum of zichron trua, but rather the kiyum of Kiddush HaShabbos, Shmiras HaShabbos. Because if at some point in history we're going to suspend this Gzeira, we're going to say, you know what? We don't have a Rosh Hashanah anymore. On a Doraisa level, we only have a Carmelis. That itself constitutes, according to the Marsham, a zilzul in Kvod Shabbos. Just to repeal the law and suspend the Isur of Shofar on Shabbos and allow the blowing of Shofar, that allowance of the blowing of the Shofar is considered like a zilzul in Kvod Shabbos. Lefichach menicham oso kim minhagam. We will leave the halacha as it were, not to touch the Shabbos. So that now Shabbos takes on a whole different dimension. We think of Shabbos in terms of a list of malachas and isurim, and they are doraisa. There's a whole other element of Shabbos. And that element of Shabbos is not going to be measured befall by the classification and the definition of any particular Isur, namely Avaras Daled Amos, and say, well, today it's only the Rabbanan. No. We're not going to analyze it from the befall, but rather from the general understanding of Shabbos, and in a context in which we will repeal the Isur of Shofar on Shabbos or the Tilas Lulav on Shabbos. That itself constitutes a zilzul in Kvod Shabbos. Who could believe such a thing? And yet the Mishnah Berurah has it in the name of the Maharshal. It's really, in my mind, it's Pachat Shakaru. Just changes my whole attitude.
It still goes back to the original Takana de Rabba, Gzeir de Rabba. The kasha comes back. In other words, why did Rabba, for the possibility that this one Joe is going to take the shofar, he was mavatal. Fine, it's a deraisa, let's say it's even deraisa at the time, but still, to be mavatal a mitzvah of the minat Torah of blowing shofar because of one chashash of that, it's still a pella.
Again, it's also kedusha Shabbos. It always comes down to kedusha Shabbos. We will suspend a mitzvah doraisa in order to protect kedusha Shabbos. If there's a possibility of chilul Shabbos, we'll suspend the mitzvah doraisa.
Okay, so don't cook because don't have any food on the thing because you may come to Mimachal Shabbos.
So that has to do with the kiyum of kvod Shabbos. In other words, the cooking. I mean, again, I don't know. I'm not sure what you mean by cooking. You probably mean shahiyah, or
in other words, ways that you
that
keep
itself
warm
is for the sake of kvod Shabbos. But you're right. I don't know the repercussions of the Marsham, but I do know that the Marsham is saying, take a look at that. Shanachnu nachzor lahatir, etc., osi lezilzule. And this is what the Torah meant when it appointed the Chachamim, not you and I. The Chachamim were granted this authority, right? Lakar dover min haTorah.
Could you answer Bobby by saying that each one of the mitzvahs is only once a year? The idea with the cooking and that is basically something that's on all of the chagim and all of this thing. So it's not just this once a year thing that we're afraid of.
So then, Adarab, you're making Bobby's kasha even more severe.
Yeah.
If it's every single Shabbos that we have to worry that
no, that you're going to be aware of it. You're more aware because you do it all the time. But with the what?
No, you're less aware because
maybe I don't know. Those kind of svaras you have to leave. I think leave for the chachamim. Because you're aware of it, therefore you won't come to cook. The truth is that the whole issue about ein bishalach or bishul b'lach, and there are people who rely on that svara, that we don't paskin like that for Ashkenazic Jews, but those who paskin ein bishalach or bishul b'lach might be violating a bishul d'oraisa, according to those shittas that say yesh bishalach or bishul b'lach. That once something was cooked and it's liquid and you again, I don't want to get into hilchas bishul now, but I think Bobby's making a fundamental point that how far do you want to go with these derabbanans and the shvusim in terms of being oker mitzvah doraisa? But that's what Rabbah's breakthrough was, and Rabbah said, you know what? For the sake of kedusha Shabbos, if we want to avoid chilul Shabbos, even on an outside chance, we will be oker mitzvah doraisa. Today, as the Mishnah Berurah points out, it's only the Rabbanan. So why do we still insist on Gzeira de Rabbah? We don't have Rosh Hashanah. Okay, Joe? So the answer is because of Zilzal. But again, the amazing thing to me is that he's framing this Zilzal in the framework of a certain historical continuity in the minhag. Keep up the minhag because it sends a message that Shabbos takes priority over even shofar.
Like minhag avosenu b'yadenu, kind of.
Well, not exactly, Bobby. What I'm saying is the minhag itself generates a zilzal in Shabbos. Do you follow what I mean? Because over the course of centuries, we avoided shofar on Shabbos in order to maintain the observance and the sanctity of Shabbos. Therefore, to repeal such a gzera would be tantamount to a zilzal in Shabbos. So I don't mean minhag avosenu b'yadenu. Minhag avosenu b'yadenu is a different kind of halacha. When he quotes the minhag here, he only means to tell you that we've already set in motion a certain, here in Israel they call it a manganon. How do you say that in English? A certain process or system. And the system has established that we weigh shofar against Shabbos, and we tip the scale in favor of Shabbos at all costs, even against shofar. And now, once that system has been set into motion, if we would now upset the system and undermine it because it's a Carmelist today, and it's only D'Rabbanan, that would be tantamount to a zilzul in Kedusha Shabbos.
But in of sorts makes sense because Chazal that we're listening to.
I hear a voice. I don't know. It's like so Mishnah. The Mishnah about Kisvu Loni Get. Choshesh, maybe it's a shade. All right.
I'm saying that once you're keeping Chazal, then it means that it's equivalent to doing a mitzvah that you meant to do. So there's something in it that's even greater once you keep that Chazal that says not to do it.
Right.
Like
it's sort of like
by shaving and Chol Hamoed, is also for Chol Hamoed by shaving.
In other words, what you're saying is that it's a kiyum of Sisa Kechal Sheyerucha, mitzvah l'shma l'divrei chachamim. But the purpose of this essay, which hopefully we'll get to, I mean, it's getting a little late, but I hope we'll fit it in, is that the kiyum here is a kiyum of shofar. And that's going to be amazing. That somehow through Shabbos, and because of Shabbos, and because that we're not blowing the shofar on Shabbos, that itself is going to create a shofar. Could you believe it? And in that sense, once again, we're closing the gap between the Yerushalmi and the Bavli. Because as we said before, according to the Yerushalmi, the mitzvah of Zichron Trua on a Doraisa level is fulfilled by non-blowing of the shofar. And we're going to try to prove that even according to the Bavli, although Zichron Trua should not be interpreted as non-fulfillment of the shofar, because if Zichron Trua is referring to Shabbos, the Torah will require of you to blow the shofar. So forget about Zichron Trua. But in some very profound sense, the Shabbos itself and its observance is going to be the substitute for the shofar. Isn't that amazing? And that's what we want to try to understand here. And that begins on the bottom of page 227. And here we quote the Leket Yosher, one of the Achronim, and he writes that on Shabbos, this coming Shabbos, for example, we should be learning Hilchas Shofar. Now, I don't know if there's a drasha in Clanton Park this Shabbos. Do they have a drasha on Rosh Hashanah? I don't know. I guess it depends from year to year. But I'm not getting involved, but I'm saying from the perspective of this particular Leket Yosher, this Shabbos, there should be a drasha. Now, Rosh Hashanah davening is not short. What time do they start in Clanton Park? Like about 7:30?
8 o'clock.
8 o'clock. So they probably finish it around noon. Am I right?
No, 1.
Even on Shabbos, they finish at 1?
Oh,
Okay.
Shabbos. Maybe earlier.
No, I just want to know before I get on a plane. No, I'm just joking. But well, what I meant to say was that it's a pretty long davening. It's either 4 hours, 5 hours, but I would still, again, in a theoretical sense, I would still insist that there should be a drasha. And why? And what would be the subject of the drasha? Shofar. And it's almost like Unishalma Parm Swasenu, that the enunciation of the laws of Shabbos is equal to blowing the shofar. But that's the Leket Yosher. Here, we're going to go on to page 228 to see something much more profound. We're going to study a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah Daf Tes Zayin, and the Gemara says that Tfilas de Miyushav are blown in order to confuse the Satan, which is called La'arbe V'Sasatan. Okay, there's a strange remez in the tour about this. He says, Ein Satan Vein Pega Rosh Shofar. It's not so, because you have to cross out the Ein in order to get Shofar. Okay, it's a little bit strange. But anyway, the Shofar is going to attack or shall we say, is going to, what's the word I'm looking for in English when you want to make the Satan impotent, powerless. And why is that so? Because all of a sudden we're blowing the shofar and we haven't even yet gotten up to Shmona Esrei yet. Now, how important is it to blow the shofar in order to confuse the Satan? It's very, very important in a scary sense. Because the Gemara quotes a statement of Rabbi Yitzchak that if we don't blow the shofar at the beginning of the year, then we empower the Satan to attack us, to prosecute against us during the entire year. And at the end, we will blow the shofar shall tainis, Rahman al-Islam. There'll be gzeros against the Jewish people in a year in which we didn't blow the shofar. Now the question is, what about an ones situation? If the pshia, they failed to blow the shofar, that's one thing. And there was no irbuv satan, it's a scary situation. But what about a case of an ones, where circumstances were beyond our control, and therefore we weren't able to blow the shofar that converts the midas hadin to midas harachamim? And here we have a chiddush of the Taz. And the Taz paskins that even in the case of ones, since they didn't blow the shofar and they didn't confuse the Satan, we're in trouble. And he compares it to the case of an ill person, a patient, who failed, machmas ones, to take his medications. He will suffer the consequences. Not as a punishment, not as a knas or an onesh because he was onus, and onus rachmana patre, but because he didn't take his trufah. He didn't have his refuah. And therefore, if we need the shofar and its power to undermine the Satan and to transfer the kisei from kisei adin to kisei arachmim, we're in trouble. And therefore, what do we do with the case of Shabbos? We have no shofar. Or do we have a shofar? But if we have no shofar, then the Taz is going to argue we weren't mevalbel the Satan, and it's going to be a scary year. Zok the Taz, and the Meshech Chochmah Rav Meir Simcha is going to embellish this idea, that when you have a mitzvah of shofar, and you were prevented from fulfilling that mitzvah of shofar, then this Satan is not mevulbal, there's no irba of Satan, and we're in trouble. But if there's no mitzvah al pi din to blow the shofar, there's no chiyuv shofar, then we don't need to be ma'arbiv the Satan. But the truth is, the question is better than the answer. Because at the end of the day, how are you going to prevent the Satan who is geared, and that's his only purpose, to prosecute against the Jewish people? There was no shofar. There was no irba of Satan. There was no trufa for the chol. Comes along the Meshech Chochmah, Rav Meir Simcha, and he says the following. We have a pasuk, ani lidodi v'dodi li. What happens here is that there's a reciprocal relationship of love between the Jewish people, ani, and dodi, and the Shekhinah and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Such that when it's ani lidodi, he calls it Am Yisrael misparim be'HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then it's dodi li. And reciprocally, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mispire b'klali. So he gives a beautiful analogy to tefillin. The Gemara establishes that we wear tefillin and HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kaviyachol wears tefillin. It shouldn't be taken literally. That will be anthropomorphism. But It means that what's in the tefillin that we wear, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, and what's in the tefillin of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Mi K'amcha Yisrael Goyechad Ba'aretz, and this is indicative of Ani L'Dodi V'Dodi Li. And therefore, he says that when we read the parsha in Bamidbar Perek Lamed Aleph of Moshe Rabbeinu's transmission of the mandate of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to take Nekoma against Midian, you remember that the Midianim tripped Bnei Yisrael into having those relationships with the Bnos Midian, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu says Nekom Nikmas Bnei Yisrael Mesa Midianim, but Moshe says it in a different way. Moshe says that Hecholtzu beitchem anoshim l'tzovel says Nikmas Hashem b'Midian. HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded Moshe Rabbeinu Nikmas Bnei Yisrael me'es Midianim. But Moshe Rabbeinu transmits it and alters it and says, Nikmas Hashem b'Midian. That now we are not taking revenge against Midian because of our own cover, the cover of Klal Yisrael, but rather for the sake of the cover of the Ribono Shel Olam. And that's to be understood in the context of this reciprocal relationship between Knesset Yisrael and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Says Rabbi Simcha, when we fail, and that's not a good word, when we are inhibited about blowing shofar on Shabbos, and yet we know that by not blowing the shofar on Shabbos, we are endangering Klal Yisrael because of the sakana of the Satan. Without the shofar on Shabbos, we don't have Irbuv Satan. But it's Ani L'Dodi. I'm Isparin HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God gave me the Shabbos, and I will glorify the Shabbos, and in so doing, I glorify the Shem Hashem, which I think is a reflection of the fact that his conscious of Shabbos is his conscious of the Ribono Shel Olam. And therefore, to quote Reb Meir Simcha Batzi Rosam Milis Koah, by non-fulfillment of shofar blowing, we are making a statement. And what are we saying? We are saying, you know what? Yikatreg Satan. Let the Satan do what he wants to do, what he has to do. V'yavra aleinu ma, whatever has to happen will happen. Ubilvad, we have to be concerned with only one goal that's primary on our mission list, and that is Shelo Yevula Chalil Shabbos, because the Shabbos is testimony of Kedusha Shimcha, of this name of Hashem. And we will place our lives in the hands of the Satan. But for the sake of Kedusha Shabbos. Says the Meshech Chochmah, Atzirosam shel Yisrael miliskoa, he gufat kia shofar chashuva. Bang this into your head. Non-fulfillment of shofar, in and of itself, is tkiya shofar. I mean, give it a break. Ketzad. Tkiya shofar mazkiras akedis yitzchak. What is akedis yitzchak? Why is it called Yom HaZikaron? Why is Trua called Zichron Trua? We ask the Ribono Shel Olam to remember akedis yitzchak. Umachnisim es zichronim shel Yisrael lefanav. We bring that memory of Klal Yisrael in front of the Almighty. Ubitol ritzonam. What is Akedus Yitzchak? If not Bitol ritzonam? What did Avraham Avinu want more than the love of Yitzchak? And yet he was mevatel his ratzon, willing to give up life. And we're going to do the same by not blowing the shofar on Shabbos. Biatzirosa miliskoa, most remis nafsh. Shofar, when we blow, is to remind Hashem of our bittul ratzon for the sake of Hashem, even at the expense of Mesiras Nefesh. That's exactly what we do when we don't blow the shofar on Shabbos, because we realize that the dangers of the makatreg, of the Satan, are lurking in the shadows. We realize that there's an element here of Mesiras Nefesh, but we're going to be mavatal our ratzon so that we observe the Shabbos and we are makadesh kiddusha shmo yisborach, which is the testimony of Shabbos. And therefore, not blowing the shofar on Shabbos of Rosh Hashanah is akedas yitzchak. It's an act of akedas haratzon, otherwise called bittul haratzon, akedas haratzon. Take your will, your most profound desire for life, and tie it up and bind it, the akedah, for the sake of Kedushas Hashem. And therefore, when we are mavatal our ratzon to blow the shofar, to be ma'ariv the satan, harehi ka'kedas Yitzchak, shebitel ritzono, just like Yitzchak was mavatal his ratzon v'nekad al kiddush shmo yisborach, is atzira. Atzira means non-fulfillment of the tekiah. He gufa akedah. So before we said, let the rabbi darshan, let us learn and study the halachas of shofar on Shabbos, great. And that should be a substitute for shofar. But now we're going much deeper than that. Shofar is not just an issue of a mitzvah, it's an issue of sakana. Shofar is our protection. And of course, immediately we're reminded of many stories in the Holocaust of Jews who blew the shofar. I don't know, gentlemen, if you ever visited Theresienstadt, which is in Czechoslovakia. I mean, it wouldn't be, let's say, shall we say, splashed on the front cover of the newspaper that the Nazis, Yimach Shemam, murdered on an average day in Theresienstadt 30,000 Jews. I mean, these are numbers that you can't even begin to comprehend. And they built a shul. It's an amazing thing to see. I mean, I'm not telling you to go to Theresienstadt, but if you're on one of these, heritage tours or whatever, for those who are in favor of those things, then you can see this tiny little shul. How they fooled the Nazis is beyond belief. Happens to be a little bit of a beautiful shul. I mean, they actually have artwork around the inside of the shul, and they blew the shofar there. Again, I have to tell you that when I saw the shul in Theresienstadt, I wondered whether or not you could be yotzei the mitzvah of shofar there, because it's tokeh l'toch habar. But at least for someone who was standing next to the tokeh, again, they probably blew it on a very low key. But there are many other stories about how they passed on a shofar through the camps at risking their lives. The shofar is our protection against the Satan. But we will give it up for the sake of Kvod Hashem through the observance of Shabbos. There'll be a ritzui lefanav, just like a ritzui of shofar. Ad kan dvarav, the heilige Reb Meir Simcha. And my feeling about Reb Meir Simcha, I don't know if you know this, I teach Reb Meir Simcha a lot. And it's very difficult. I have to tell you, anybody today who understands Reb Meir Simcha in his Meshech Chochmah, it's only b'schus one Jew, and that's Rav Kuperman. Did an amazing job. And very often I walk away from the Meshech Chochmah and I say, it's a nice vart, you know what I mean? He has a Gemara here, and he shall be here, and a Medrash here, and a Mechilta, Sifri, Sifra. He's got it all at his fingertips. It's very impressive. But the bottom line, it's still a bit of a drush. I mean, Shivim Panim LaTorah, I'm not being Mezalzel in drush. I do it myself from time to time. But this particular Yesod is mind-boggling. If you accept it, it's a whole different approach. And how many hours are we before Shabbos? I just got Algie's, new calendar in the mail. Algie on the shoulder. Anyway. El yeshba havatal is batlus klapi maila hanachsheves kitkiya. So the shofar of Rosh Hashanah, which doesn't exist on Shabbos, is the shofar of Vidodi Li, because it's Ani Lidodi, and reciprocally Vidodi Li, which is, by the way, as you know, the pasuk that's a remez for Elul. Now we're making that journey from Elul to Rosh Hashanah. I just want to end with the following. And, the drush of Rameir Simcha whets my appetite for drush. The Gemara tells us in Rosh Hashanah that you cannot fulfill your mitzvah of shofar by hearing the shofar from someone who does not have you in mind. We need kavanas shomea, which is a pashut, and we need kavanas mashmiya. So Ploni Almoni, who's going to be Yotze with his blowing the shofar, he cannot be Motzi me if he didn't have kavanah to be Motzi me. Again, it doesn't mean me, Azariah Burzon, it means to be Motzi the Tzibur. But if he thought it, let's say he was blowing it for himself, he didn't realize that there's somebody outside there who's listening, and he wants to, that person is not Yotze. And that's the Gemara of Zera, and the Rambam Paskins like that Gemara. L'chora, it makes no sense whatsoever. Because the Rambam holds, and he says it over and over and over again, we touched on it in the past, that the mitzvah of shofar is shmir, not tkiyah. So why do I have to link up to the tkiyah of the tokeah by him having me in mind? Why isn't it enough that I have in mind to be yotze with the shmir of his kol shofar? And honestly, I don't have an answer to that question. Maybe you do, I don't. But al Pidrush, I saw a phenomenal concept in the Likutei Halachos of Rabbi Nosson of Breslov. And Rabbi Nosson writes that kol shofar really bifurcates into two. There are two kolos. There's one kol which is mile'ela litata, from up to bottom, meaning from Shamayim down to Aretz. And there's another kol shofar, which is milatata li'elu, going from down here to up there. The first shofar is blown kaviyachol by Hashem. Uru yeshena mishnascha. God Almighty blows the shofar to wake us up. He, with a capital H, is blowing the shofar. But then there's another shofar. And that's the shofar that we blow to create and project a zikaron, for example, of Akeres Yitzchak, in front of the Ribono Shel Olam. So who's blowing and who's hearing the shofar? The answer is twofold. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is blowing, but he's also hearing. We are blowing, but we're also hearing. And to create that connection and that integration in which the Tokea and the Shomea are both together playing a role to fulfill these two dimensions of shofar, we need Kavanas Mashmiya and Kavanas Shomea. So let me just take this opportunity to thank you for being with us and learning together. Wish you all a great Rosh Hashana, and it should be a ksiva chesima tova, and it should be besimcha and nachas, and as we say here in Israel, b'sarot tovot for all of us,
Amen.
and our children, our grandchildren.
Yep.
Ken Yiratzon. Amen.
It should be a mazel dika year in your new makkah.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much.
Can I tell
Thank
you one
you.
thing before you go?
What?
Can I say one thing before you go?
Oh yeah, please, David.
Okay, so I heard this I don't know how many years ago, maybe 40, maybe 50 years ago, and I don't remember who said it or read it somewhere.
Wait a second, David. You aren't even born 50 years ago. All right. Yeah.
Well, maybe not, but anyway. So I heard this thing or heard or read it, whatever it was, I don't remember. Basically, the concept is that when Rosh Hashana is the first day of Shabbos, so we assume, I mean, at least in a homiletical sense, that Kodesh Baruch Hu is Shomer Shabbos. Again, whatever that means, right? He served mitzvahs like tefillin and so. Okay, so the thing is, we say the Sefer Chaim V'Mesim are open, and Kodesh Baruch Hu is writing things in either book, depending, right? So if you say Kodesh Baruch Hu Shomer Shabbos, then he is unable to write in Sefer Mesim on Shabbos because it's writing. However, for Pikuach Nefesh, he can write in Sefer Chaim.
Yeah, see that in a sefer called Dovev Meisharim. I don't know if you ever heard.
That's what says it.
That's my father's sefer. Yeah.
Oh, you probably said it. Okay.
I don't know if he may have heard it from somebody else. I don't know, but that's what we say that Kodesh Baruch Hu. Today is Yom Tov. There's no writing on Shabbos, on Yom Tov. So therefore, we were alive, and you had last year's Gzera on Rosh Hashanah. Leave it as is. Don't change the
You can't write on Yom Tov either.
You're right.
That's what I'm saying. That we say that Kodesh Baruch Hu.
Right.
It's Yom Tov. You can't write. Leave it as is.
Actually, one more thing I want to ask quickly, and that is, if according to Mishnah Berurah, you said there's no Rosh Hashanah Deraisa today, right?
That's what he says. Yeah.
So does Rav Moshe argue on that when he says you can't make an Erev Manhattan because it's just Rosh Deraisa?
I don't know. I'd have to go through the tshuva. I don't remember.
Okay.
Yeah. All right then. Call to.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you.